The blood trickled down Helena Turner's face as she lay sprawled in the dirt of Main Street, Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory. 1878. The midday sun beat down mercilessly as townsfolk gathered in a circle, their faces a mixture of morbid fascination and discomfort, none brave enough to intervene as Thomas Webb, the saloon owner, delivered another brutal kick to her ribs. "Filthy thief," he spat, his face contorted with rage. "Thought you could steal from me. Nobody steals from Tom Webb." Helena curled into herself, protecting her head with bloodied hands. She hadn't stolen anything, she'd only asked for the wages he owed her after 3 weeks of washing dishes and cleaning rooms at his establishment. When she'd threatened to speak to the sheriff about his refusal to pay, Webb had dragged her into the street for this public punishment. "Please," she whimpered, tasting copper on her lips. At 22, Helena had already endured more suffering than most faced in a lifetime. Orphaned at 16, she'd been drifting westward for years, taking whatever honest work she could find. Redemption Creek was supposed to be a new beginning, not another nightmare. Webb drew back his foot for another strike when the crowd suddenly parted. The sound of spurs jingling against the packed earth cut through the murmurs of the onlookers. "That's enough." The voice was quiet but carried the weight of steel. Helena peered through swollen eyelids to see a tall figure stepping forward. The sun silhouetted him from behind, making it difficult to distinguish his features. But she could make out the distinctive shape of a cowboy hat and the glint of a star-shaped badge on his chest. Ethan Daniels, the newly appointed deputy marshal, moved with deliberate steps toward Webb, one hand resting casually on his holster. At 28, he had already built a reputation as a fair but formidable lawman across 3 territories. "This ain't your business, Daniels," Webb snarled, though he took a half-step back. "Public beatings in the middle of my town." Ethan's voice remained calm. "That makes it my business. She's a thief. Then you bring her to the sheriff." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You don't deliver your own justice, Webb." The saloon owner's face flushed crimson. The law in this town has changed," Ethan interrupted, closing the distance between them. Standing a head taller than Webb, he looked down at the man with cold determination. "Now back away from the lady." The tension stretched between them until Webb finally spat on the ground near Helena's face and stalked back toward his saloon, shouting over his shoulder. "This ain't over, Daniels." The crowd began to disperse, suddenly embarrassed by their inaction. Ethan knelt beside Helena, removing his bandana to gently wipe the blood from her face. "Can you stand, miss?" he asked softly. Helena tried to push herself up but collapsed with a pained gasp. Ethan carefully helped her into a sitting position, supporting her weight. "I'm taking you to Doc Miller," he said, then scooped her into his arms as though she weighed nothing. As he carried her through the parting crowd, he looked down at her bruised face, and something fierce passed through his eyes. "You'll never be touched again," he said, loud enough for the lingering townsfolk to hear. "Not in my town, not while I draw breath." Helena closed her eyes, too exhausted and hurt to process his words, but somehow believing them all the same. Doctor Miller's clinic was a modest 2-room structure at the edge of town. The elderly physician frowned deeply when Ethan carried Helena through his door. "Webb's work?" he asked, already preparing his examination table. Ethan nodded grimly, laying Helena down with gentle care. "Found him beating her in the street, half the town watching like it was a damn show." The doctor shook his head in disgust as he began examining Helena's injuries. "This town's been without proper law too long. Sheriff Blackburn's been more interested in cards and whiskey than keeping order." "That's changing," Ethan replied firmly. Helena winced as the doctor probed her ribs. "Nothing seems broken, thankfully," Miller said, "but she's badly bruised and that cut above her eye needs stitching." While the doctor worked, Ethan pulled up a chair beside the examination table. "What's your name, miss?" he asked. "Helena Turner," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Turner, I need to know what happened." She told him everything, how she'd come to Redemption Creek 3 weeks ago, finding work at Webb's saloon, cleaning and washing dishes. How Webb had refused to pay her the agreed wages, accusing her of breaking expensive glassware. How he'd flown into a rage when she'd mentioned speaking to the sheriff. Ethan listened, his jaw tightening. Webb's pulled this before. Hires women passing through, then finds excuses not to pay. Usually runs them out of town before they can complain. I have nowhere else to go, Helena admitted, tears welling in her eyes. I spent my last money on a room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, but that's due tomorrow. Dr. Miller finished cleaning her wounds and stepped back. You need rest, young lady, at least a few days. Ethan stood, adjusting his hat. Miss Turner will have a place to stay and time to recover. I'll see to it personally. Helena tried to protest, but the deputy raised his hand. This town owes you that much at least. After a brief discussion with the doctor, Ethan helped Helena to her feet. I'm taking you to my sister's place. She runs a small dress shop with rooms above. You'll be safe there. Why are you helping me? Helena asked as they slowly made their way down the boardwalk, her arm draped across his shoulders for support. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. When I took this badge, I swore that wouldn't happen in my town. His expression softened slightly. Besides, Sarah, my sister, has been wanting company. She'll be glad to have you. Sarah Daniels proved to be a warm, enthusiastic woman in her mid-20s who took one look at Helena and immediately bustled into action, preparing a bed and hot tea. The small apartment above her dress shop was neat and comfortable, smelling of lavender and fresh fabric. You poor dear, Sarah clucked as she helped Helena into clean clothes. Ethan, put the kettle on and fetch some of that rabbit stew Mrs. Peterson brought over yesterday. Ethan looked almost comically out of place in the feminine surroundings, but moved with surprising ease in his sister's kitchen. You'll stay as long as you need, Sarah told Helena firmly. No arguments. We have the room, and I could use help in the shop once you're feeling better, if you'd like work, that is. Helena felt overwhelmed by the kindness. I don't know how to thank you both. No need for thanks, Ethan said, placing a steaming bowl of stew before her. Just focus on getting better. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. I'll be speaking with Webb. You'll get the wages you're owed, Miss Turner. You have my word. After he left, Sarah smiled knowingly at Helena. My brother doesn't make promises lightly. If he says Webb will pay, then Webb will pay. That night, for the first time in weeks, Helena slept without fear. The following morning, Ethan strode purposefully toward Webb's saloon. The establishment was quiet in the early hours, with only a few patrons nursing their drinks at scattered tables. Webb was behind the bar, tallying figures in a ledger. His face darkened when he saw Ethan. Come to apologize for yesterday? Webb sneered. Ethan leaned against the bar. I've come for Miss Turner's wages. 3 weeks at the rate you agreed upon. Webb laughed. That little thief. She broke more in glassware than she earned. Funny thing about that, Ethan replied evenly. I spoke with Maggie, your barmaid. She says nothing was broken. Says you've pulled this same trick with 3 other girls in the past 6 months. Webb's face flushed. Maggie should mind her own business. Miss Turner's wages are my business now. Ethan's tone remained conversational, but his eyes had hardened. As is the fact that you've been watering down your whiskey and shortchanging minors on their gold exchanges. The saloon owner's face paled. That's a damned lie, is it? I wonder what Marshall Clayton would say if I wired him about it. He's been looking for a reason to inspect businesses along this stretch for a while now. Webb stared at him for a long moment, then wordlessly reached under the bar and pulled out a small pouch. He counted out several coins and slid them across to Ethan, her wages. In full, now we're square. Ethan pocketed the money but didn't move. Not quite. You publicly accused Miss Turner of being a thief. You'll publicly retract that accusation. The hell I will, tonight. During the busiest hour, you'll announce that you made a mistake. Ethan straightened. Unless you'd prefer I start that investigation. Webb's knuckles whitened around the edge of the bar. "Fine," he spat. "One more thing," Ethan added as he turned to leave. "If I ever see you lay hands on another person in this town, man, woman, or child, you won't have to worry about the marshal. You'll have to worry about me." The threat hung in the air as Ethan walked out, leaving Webb seething behind him. Helena spent the day resting in Sarah's apartment, moving carefully to avoid aggravating her bruised ribs. Sarah had insisted on closing the shop for the day to tend to her, bringing broth and tea at regular intervals, and regaling her with stories about the town and its inhabitants. "Ethan came to Redemption Creek about 6 months ago," Sarah explained as she mended a dress by the window. "I'd been here a year already, trying to make a go of this shop. Things were difficult. Sheriff Blackburn lets his deputies do as they please, and some of them were worse than the criminals." She smiled fondly. "Then my big brother rode into town. He'd been a lawman over in the New Mexico territory, built quite a reputation. Sheriff wasn't happy about the territorial marshal forcing a new deputy on him, but he couldn't refuse. He seems like a good man," Helena said softly. Sarah's smile widened. "The best. Lost both our parents young, and he raised me more than they ever did. Worked 3 jobs to make sure I could go to that fancy school back east." Her expression grew serious. "He's had to be hard to survive, but there's a gentleness in him too. He just doesn't show it often." Later that afternoon, Ethan returned with Helena's wages and news of Webb's forced retraction. "You should be there to hear it," he told her. "Let people see you're not hiding." Helena touched the bruise on her cheek self-consciously, looking like this. Sarah jumped to her feet. "I have just the thing." She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a beautiful blue dress and a stylish hat with a partial veil. "This was a commission that was never collected. With a few quick alterations, it should fit you perfectly. The hat will help conceal the worst of the bruising while still allowing you to hold your head high." 2 hours later, Helena stood before the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress highlighted her slender figure while the hat cast flattering shadows across her face, the delicate veil providing just enough coverage of her injuries without appearing as though she was hiding. "You look beautiful," Sarah declared proudly. Ethan, who had returned to escort them, stood speechless in the doorway. For a moment, his carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing genuine admiration before he cleared his throat and offered his arm. "Shall we, ladies?" The saloon was crowded when they arrived, filled with miners, cowboys, and town residents enjoying their evening drinks. A hush fell over the room when Ethan entered with Helena on his arm and Sarah following close behind. Webb's face contorted with barely contained fury when he spotted them, but he had no choice. Too many witnesses had seen Ethan enter his establishment earlier. Ethan led Helena to a prominent table near the center of the room, making sure everyone could see her. The whispers grew as people recognized her despite the hat and veil. Finally, Webb slammed a glass on the bar for attention. "Got something to say," he announced grudgingly. "Made a mistake yesterday. Miss Turner here didn't steal nothing from me. It was a misunderstanding about her wages, which have been settled in full." The words clearly pained him. "That's all." He turned away quickly, but Ethan's voice stopped him. "Aren't you forgetting something, Webb?" The saloon owner's shoulders tensed. He turned back, face purpling with suppressed rage. "And I apologize for the misunderstanding." The silence in the room was deafening until Maggie, the barmaid, began to clap slowly. Others joined in, and soon the entire saloon erupted in applause not for Webb, but for Helena and the deputy who had stood for her. As they left the saloon, Helena felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said to Ethan as he walked her and Sarah home. "I've never had anyone stand up for me like that before." Ethan's expression softened in the moonlight. "Everyone deserves justice, Miss Turner. Even strangers passing through." "Helena," she corrected gently. "After all this, I think you can call me Helena." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Helena, then." In the days that followed, Helena began helping in Sarah's dress shop as she recovered. Her nimble fingers and eye for detail proved valuable as she assisted with alterations and embellishments. The shop saw increased business as word spread about the incident, with many of the town's women finding excuses to visit and see the young woman who had Deputy Daniel's protection. Ethan stopped by regularly, ostensibly to check on Helena's recovery, but lingering longer each time. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers he'd spotted on his rounds, or pastries from the bakery. Sarah watched these developments with poorly concealed delight, often finding reasons to leave them alone together. One evening, about 2 weeks after the incident, Ethan invited Helena to join him for a walk along the creek that gave the town its name. "I wanted to ask about your plans," he said as they strolled along the bank, the setting sun painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. "Sarah tells me you've been a great help at the shop." Helena nodded. "She's offered me a permanent position I'm thinking of accepting." "You're staying in Redemption Creek then?" Something in his voice made her glance up at him. "I think so. For the first time since my parents died, I feel like I might have found a place where I belong." She hesitated. "Unless you think that's unwise." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I think it's the wisest decision you could make," he said softly. "I've enjoyed getting to know you, Helena, more than I expected to." The intensity in his gaze made her heart flutter. "I've enjoyed it too." He took a step closer. "There's a social at the church this Saturday. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" Helena felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I'd like that very much." As they walked back toward town, Ethan tentatively offered his hand. Helena took it, feeling the strength and gentleness in his calloused fingers as they intertwined with hers. News of Helena Turner and Deputy Daniels attending the church social together spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. By Saturday evening, the small church hall was unusually crowded, many attendees drawn by curiosity about the blossoming relationship. Helena wore a new dress that she and Sarah had worked on together, a modest but flattering creation in soft green that complemented her auburn hair. Her bruises had faded to barely noticeable shadows, and she held herself with newfound confidence as Ethan escorted her into the hall. "Half the town is staring," she whispered nervously. Ethan's hand pressed reassuringly against the small of her back. "Let them stare. You're the prettiest woman here." The evening was filled with music, dancing, and generous helpings of the town's best home cooking. Helena found herself welcomed by most of the community, many expressing belated regret for not intervening during her ordeal. Sheriff Blackburn himself, a grizzled man in his 50s who rarely attended social functions, made a point of coming over to introduce himself. "Deputy Daniels speaks highly of you, Miss Turner," he said, surprisingly cordial. "Says you showed real courage. Redemption Creek could use more folk like that." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, noticing Ethan's approving nod behind Blackburn's shoulder. As the evening progressed, Ethan led Helena onto the dance floor. He moved with unexpected grace for such a tall man, guiding her through a waltz with confidence. "I didn't know lawmen could dance so well," she teased. A rare smile brightened his face. "My mother insisted I learn, said a man should know how to do more than shoot and ride." She was right. Ethan's expression grew wistful. She usually was. "What happened to your parents?" Helena asked gently, his eyes darkened. "Fever took mother when Sarah was just 10. Father, he was a Texas Ranger, killed by cattle rustlers 2 years later." He paused. "What about yours?" "Wagon accident," Helena replied. "We were heading west to California. Father lost control on a mountain pass. I was thrown clear, but they—" She swallowed hard. "I was 16. Ethan's arms tightened around her slightly. "You've been alone since then," she nodded. "Moving from town to town, taking whatever work I could find, never staying long enough to." She trailed off to put down roots, he finished for her. "Yes." The music ended, but they remained close, something unspoken passing between them. "Perhaps it's time," Ethan said softly. The moment was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance to the hall. Thomas Webb stood in the doorway, clearly intoxicated, his bloodshot eyes scanning the room until they landed on Helena and Ethan. "There she is," he slurred, pointing an accusatory finger. "The thief who's got our deputy fooled." Ethan immediately stepped in front of Helena. "Webb, you're drunk. Go home before you do something you'll regret." The saloon owner staggered forward. "Whole town's talking about how she's got you wrapped around her finger." "What'd she do to convince you, Daniels?" "Same thing she was offering my customers after hours." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his gun, but Helena grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "He's not worth it." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he nodded slightly. Instead of drawing his weapon, he strode purposefully toward Webb. "You gave your word, Webb. Public retraction, remember?" Webb sneered. "That was before I knew you were betting the—" He never finished the sentence. Ethan's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling onto the floor. The deputy stood over him, breathing hard. "I told you what would happen if you caused trouble again," he said, voice dangerously quiet. "Now you're spending the night in my jail cell. Tomorrow you can explain yourself to the sheriff." Sheriff Blackburn stepped forward. "I'll handle this, deputy." "You stay with your lady." He hauled Webb to his feet with surprising strength. "Come along, Tom. You and I need to have a long, overdue conversation about your place in this community." As they left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the hall. Helena felt every eye upon her, judging, wondering if Webb's accusations held any truth. She fought the urge to flee, forcing herself to stand tall despite the whispers. Then Sarah appeared at her side, taking her hand firmly. "Mrs. Peterson," she called out to the mayor's wife, "wasn't that cake of yours simply divine? I don't suppose you'd share the recipe." The older woman blinked in surprise, then smiled warmly. "Why, of course, dear. It's a family secret, but I'd be happy to make an exception." The tension in the room gradually dissipated as conversations resumed. The band struck up another tune and couples returned to the dance floor. Helena squeezed Sarah's hand gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's what family does," Sarah replied simply. Ethan rejoined them, concern etched across his features. "Are you all right? I'm sorry about Webb." Helena nodded. "I'm fine, but perhaps it's time to leave." Outside in the cool evening air, Helena released a shaky breath. "Webb's accusations, people will talk." Ethan took her hands in his. "Let them. Anyone who matters knows the truth." "And what is the truth, Deputy Daniels?" she asked, finding courage in the darkness. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The truth is that I'm falling in love with you, Helena Turner. Have been since the moment I carried you to the doctor's office." Her heart soared at his confession. "Even when I was bruised and bloodied, especially then, when I saw your courage, your dignity despite everything, I knew you were someone special." Helena reached up to touch his face. "I'm falling in love with you too, Ethan. I never expected to find someone like you, especially not in Redemption Creek." When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise in the moonlight. The weeks that followed brought significant changes to Redemption Creek. Sheriff Blackburn, inspired by Ethan's commitment to justice, began taking a more active role in maintaining order. Thomas Webb found himself increasingly isolated as the town's opinion turned against him, his business suffering as many chose to patronize the newer, more reputable saloon that had opened on the other end of town. Helena flourished working alongside Sarah in the dress shop, her natural talent for design bringing in customers from neighboring settlements. The two women became inseparable, true sisters in all but blood. Helena moved into her own small room above the shop, grateful for the independence while still being close to Sarah. Ethan courted Helena properly, taking her on picnics by the creek, escorting her to church on Sundays, and bringing her small gifts that showed how well he was coming to know her. A journal with a leather cover when she mentioned enjoying writing, a potted herb garden for her window after she spoke of missing her mother's cooking. Their relationship deepened as autumn painted the landscape in vibrant hues. They shared stories of their pasts, dreams for their futures, and discovered the many ways their souls seemed to complement each other. Helena admired Ethan's unwavering sense of justice, his quiet strength, and the tenderness he revealed only to her and Sarah. Ethan treasured Helena's resilience, her compassion, and the way she had transformed her suffering into kindness. On a crisp October evening, Ethan invited Helena for a ride outside of town. They followed the creek upstream to a small plateau overlooking the valley, where Ethan had prepared a surprise picnic dinner. "It's beautiful up here," Helena said, gazing at the town below, nestled among the trees with smoke rising from chimneys against the setting sun. "I found this spot my first week in Redemption Creek," Ethan explained, laying out the meal. "I come here to think sometimes." They ate and talked as twilight descended, watching as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. When the meal was finished, Ethan grew unusually quiet, a nervous energy about him that Helena had never seen before. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He shook his head, taking her hand. "Nothing's wrong. For the first time in my life, everything feels right." He took a deep breath. "Helena, when I came to Redemption Creek, I was just doing my job. I didn't expect to find a home here, and I certainly didn't expect to find you." Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I'm not a man of many words, but I want you to know that I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, and the way you've made me believe in second chances." He opened the pouch, revealing a simple but elegant gold ring with a small pearl. "This was my mother's. I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right person to give it to." Ethan slid from the blanket onto one knee. "Helena Turner, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Helena's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When he looked up, the usually stoic deputy had tears in his own eyes. "I promise to protect you, to honor you, and to spend every day trying to be worthy of your love." Helena pulled him to his feet and into her arms. "You already are." Their kiss sealed the promise as the stars watched from above. The news of Deputy Daniel's engagement to Miss Turner spread quickly through Redemption Creek, met with general approval and excitement. Sarah was ecstatic, immediately beginning plans for a wedding dress that would make her brother speechless all over again. They set the date for December, wanting a small ceremony before the worst of winter set in. Helena wrote to a few friends she'd made in her travels, while Ethan sent word to former colleagues and the few distant relatives they had remaining. As the wedding approached, Redemption Creek experienced an unexpected development. Sheriff Blackburn announced his retirement, citing his desire to spend more time with his grandchildren back east. To everyone's surprise, he recommended Ethan as his replacement. "Town's changing," Blackburn told Ethan when he offered him the position. "Need someone who can change with it, someone who sees what it could be, not just what it's been." Ethan accepted the responsibility with characteristic solemnity, though he confessed his concerns to Helena that night. "Sheriff carries more weight than deputy," he explained as they sat by the fire in Sarah's parlor. "More danger, too. Are you sure you want to be a sheriff's wife?" Helena took his hands in hers. "I want to be your wife, Ethan Daniels." "Whatever title comes before your name doesn't change who you are," he smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Yes," she laughed, "but I wouldn't mind hearing it again." The morning of their wedding dawned clear and cold, the December air crisp with the promise of snow. The small church was decorated with evergreen boughs and red berries, simple but elegant. Helena prepared in Sarah's apartment, where her friend had transformed her into a vision in ivory silk and lace. "Something old," Sarah said, adjusting the pearl ring on Helena's finger. "Something new," she continued, placing a delicate lace veil on her head. "Something borrowed," she added, fastening a small silver brooch to Helena's bodice. "And something blue." She handed Helena a blue ribbon to tie around her bouquet of winter roses. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, stepping back to admire her work. Tears glistened in her eyes. Ethan won't know what hit him. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Dr. Miller, who had agreed to walk Helena down the aisle in the absence of her father. "It's time, my dear," he said warmly. "Your groom is waiting, and if his pacing is any indication, he's rather impatient." The church fell silent as Helena entered on Dr. Miller's arm. Ethan stood at the altar, wearing his best suit, his badge polished to a shine on his chest. His eyes never left her as she walked toward him, love and wonder plainly written on his face. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their vows spoken with clear voices that carried to every corner of the packed church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Helena with such tenderness that many in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, decorated by the women of Redemption Creek with care and attention. There was music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. Helena and Ethan moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from friends new and old. As the evening progressed, Helena found herself momentarily alone, watching Ethan across the room as he laughed with some of his deputies. She marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few months, from being beaten in the street to becoming the sheriff's wife, from a drifter with no roots to a woman with a home, a family, and a future. "Mrs. Daniels," a voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find Thomas Webb standing awkwardly before her, hat in hand. Sober and subdued, he looked nothing like the arrogant saloon owner who had once caused her so much pain. "Mr. Webb," she acknowledged cautiously. He cleared his throat. "I came to offer my congratulations, and—" He hesitated. "My sincere apology. What I did to you was unforgivable. What I said about you afterward was worse." Helena studied his face, surprised by the genuine remorse she saw there. "What changed, Mr. Webb?" "I did," he admitted. "After that night at the social, the sheriff locked me up for 3 days. Made me listen while he read passages from his Bible about justice and repentance. When he finally let me out, my saloon was nearly empty. Customers gone, staff quit." He shook his head ruefully. "Had a lot of time to think about the man I'd become." He extended his hand, offering a small package. "A wedding gift, not much, but I hope you'll accept it as a first step toward making amends." Helena hesitated, then took the package. Inside was a deed. "This is—" "The deed to my saloon," Webb confirmed. "I'm leaving town, heading back east to care for my ailing sister. The place is yours and the sheriff's now. Do with it what you will." Before Helena could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his posture protective. "Everything all right here?" he asked, eyeing Webb with suspicion. Helena showed him the deed. "Mr. Webb was just giving us a wedding gift, quite an unexpected one." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's generous." Webb nodded once. "Least I could do. I wish you both happiness." With that, he replaced his hat and walked toward the exit. "Do you think he meant it?" Helena asked as they watched him leave. Ethan considered. "I think a man facing his own failures often discovers truths he's been avoiding, whether it lasts." He shrugged. "That's up to him." They danced late into the night, surrounded by friends and well-wishers. When it came time to leave, they departed amid cheers and thrown flower petals, riding in a decorated wagon to their new home, a small but sturdy house at the edge of town that Ethan had been secretly preparing for weeks. He carried her across the threshold as tradition demanded, setting her down gently in their front room. A fire was already burning in the hearth, casting a warm glow throughout the space. "Welcome home, Mrs. Daniels," he said softly. Helena explored the house with growing delight, the cozy parlor with bookshelves Ethan had built himself, the kitchen with its new cookstove, the bedroom with its handmade quilt and lace curtains that Sarah had contributed. "It's perfect," she declared, returning to his arms. "Absolutely perfect." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Helena traced the lines of Ethan's face with gentle fingers. "Do you remember what you said to me? That day in the street," he nodded, drawing her closer. "I meant every word." "You've kept your promise," she whispered. "I've never felt safer than I do with you." And I never will, he vowed. But it's more than that now. I don't just want to protect you, Helena, I want to build a life with you, a family, she smiled in the darkness. I'd like that too. Spring brought new beginnings to Redemption Creek. The town was growing, with new businesses opening along Main Street. Helena and Sarah had expanded the dress shop, taking over the neighboring storefront to add a selection of fine fabrics and notions that drew customers from as far as Tucson. The former Webb Saloon had been transformed as well. After much discussion, Ethan and Helena had decided to convert it into a proper hotel and restaurant, something the growing town desperately needed. They hired Maggie, Webb's former barmaid, to manage it, and under her capable direction, it quickly became a respectable establishment that the town could be proud of. As for Ethan, his tenure as sheriff had brought positive changes to Redemption Creek. He'd established regular patrols, trained his deputies properly, and worked with neighboring towns to address regional issues like cattle rustling and stagecoach robberies. His reputation for fairness and integrity spread throughout the territory. One evening in late April, Helena sat on their front porch, watching the sunset as she waited for Ethan to return from his rounds. When his familiar figure appeared on horseback, she felt the same flutter in her heart that had been there from the beginning. He dismounted with a smile, climbing the steps to place a kiss on her forehead. "How are my two favorite people today?" Helena took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Growing stronger every day, I think. Dr. Miller says everything looks perfect." The news of their expected child had come as a joyful surprise just weeks earlier. Ethan had been overcome with emotion, speechless for several minutes before gathering Helena in his arms and spinning her around the kitchen. Now he sat beside her on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the stars appear one by one. "I've been thinking about names," Helena said, leaning against his chest. "Oh, any favorites yet?" she smiled. "If it's a boy, I was thinking of Michael after your father." Ethan's arm tightened around her. He would have liked that. "And if it's a girl, perhaps Rose after my mother." Michael or Rose Daniels, Ethan tested the names. Strong names, good names. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle creaking of the swing keeping time with the chorus of night insects. "Did you ever imagine this?" Helena asked eventually. "When you rode into Redemption Creek last year, did you ever think you'd end up here?" Ethan considered the question. "I hoped for purpose, for a chance to make a difference." He kissed the top of her head. "But this you, our child, this home we're building together, this is more than I ever dared to hope for." Helena closed her eyes, savoring the moment. From the darkest day of her life had come the greatest happiness she could imagine. The beating that had nearly broken her spirit had instead led her to love, to family, to belonging. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being the man who stopped when everyone else just watched. For saying I'd never be touched again, and then touching me with such love that it healed every wound." Ethan turned her face up to his. "I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of you, Helena Daniels." "You already are," she assured him, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. As summer bloomed across the Arizona territory, Redemption Creek continued to grow and prosper. Helena's pregnancy advanced, bringing with it a radiant glow that had the town's matrons nodding approvingly whenever she passed. Sarah threw herself into the role of future aunt with enthusiasm, knitting tiny garments and planning elaborate decorations for the baby's room. In August, just as Helena entered her 7th month, the town organized a celebration for its founding anniversary. Tables lined Main Street, laden with food and drink, while musicians played on a specially constructed platform. Children raced up and down the boardwalks, their laughter mingling with the conversations of their elders. Helena sat beneath a canvas awning, fanning herself against the summer heat as Sarah kept her company. Ethan was nearby, deep in conversation with several ranchers, but his eyes frequently sought out his wife, checking on her welfare. "He's like a mother hen," Sarah teased, noticing his vigilance. Helena smiled. "I don't mind, it's sweet." Sweet is not a word most people would associate with my brother, the stern Sheriff Daniels, Sarah laughed. You've changed him, Helena, for the better. We've changed each other, Helena corrected gently. As the afternoon progressed, Ethan joined them, bringing cool drinks and insisting that Helena rest. Just as they were discussing returning home to escape the heat, a commotion at the edge of town drew everyone's attention. A group of riders was approaching trail-worn men leading pack mules laden with equipment. Prospectors, by the look of them, coming to try their luck in the hills beyond Redemption Creek. Ethan stood, instinctively positioning himself between the newcomers and his pregnant wife. "Stay here," he instructed before striding toward the riders, hand resting casually near his holster. Helena watched as he greeted the men, his posture alert but not aggressive. After a brief conversation, Ethan's stance relaxed and he gestured toward the hotel, apparently giving directions. "All clear," he reported upon returning. "Just miners heading for the Sycamore Canyon claims, stopping for supplies." The celebration continued as the newcomers dispersed, some heading for the hotel, others for the general store. Helena was about to suggest they head home when a shout rang out from near the saloon-turned-hotel. "Daniels, Sheriff Daniels." One of the miners was running toward them, panic clear on his face. "Fire at the hotel, kitchen's ablaze." Ethan was moving before the man finished speaking, calling for his deputies and organizing the townspeople into a bucket brigade. Helena struggled to her feet, ignoring Sarah's protests. "You should stay here," Sarah insisted, concern evident in her voice. Helena shook her head. "Maggie's in there and guests. I need to help." By the time they reached the hotel, smoke was billowing from the back windows. Ethan and several men were already inside, evacuating guests and staff. Helena and Sarah joined the women organizing shelter for those displaced, setting up temporary accommodations in the church hall. Hours later, the fire was finally extinguished. The kitchen and back rooms of the hotel were severely damaged, but the main structure had been saved. Miraculously, no one had been seriously injured, though several people, including Ethan, were treated for smoke inhalation. Helena found her husband sitting on a bench outside the doctor's office, his face streaked with soot, coughing occasionally. "You should be resting," he admonished when he saw her. "So should you," she countered, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "Dr. Miller says you inhaled a lot of smoke." Ethan shrugged. "I'll be fine." "You saved Maggie's life," Helena said softly. "She told me you carried her out when the stairway collapsed." "Just doing my job." Helena squeezed his hand. "It's more than that. You never hesitate, never calculate the cost when someone needs help. It's who you are." They sat in silence for a moment, watching as the town slowly returned to normal, the excitement of the fire giving way to exhaustion. "The hotel will need extensive repairs," Ethan said eventually. "Insurance should cover most of it, but it'll be closed for weeks." Helena nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps it's an opportunity. We could make some improvements while we're rebuilding. Maggie's been wanting larger guest rooms on the second floor." Ethan smiled tiredly. "Always looking for the silver lining, aren't you?" "I learned from experience," she replied, touching her rounded belly. "Sometimes the worst days lead to the best blessings." The baby arrived in early October, on a night when the first autumn chill whispered of the winter to come. After 12 hours of labor, Helena gave birth to a healthy baby girl, her cries strong and indignant as Dr. Miller placed her in her mother's arms. "She has your determination," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at his daughter, "and your beauty." "Rose Sarah Daniels," Helena whispered, tracing the tiny features of her daughter's face. "Welcome to the world, little one." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Helena, the other hand gently stroking his daughter's downy head. "I never knew it was possible to love this much," he confessed. "It frightens me a little." "What does?" "How much I have to lose now." His eyes met hers, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. "How will I protect you both from everything that could hurt you?" Helena leaned against him. "You can't, my love, not from everything, but you've given us both a home, a family, a place where we belong." That's protection of the most important kind. As Rose grew from infant to toddler, Redemption Creek continued to prosper. The hotel reopened, better than before, becoming a hub for travelers throughout the territory. Helena divided her time between motherhood and helping Sarah with the dress shop, which had expanded again to include a millinery department. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, spending every free moment with his daughter. The stern sheriff melted completely in Rose's presence, reading to her for hours, building her tiny furniture with his own hands, and taking her on short rides around town on his horse. By Rose's second birthday, Helena was expecting their second child. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she was no longer haunted by old fears. She moved through her days with confidence, secure in the love that surrounded her. The morning of Rose's birthday celebration, Helena stood in their kitchen, preparing a special breakfast while Ethan entertained their daughter in the parlor. Through the doorway, she could see them on the floor, building a tower with wooden blocks that Ethan had carved. "Higher, Papa." Rose demanded, her dark curls bouncing as she clapped her hands. "If we go any higher, it'll fall," Ethan warned, but added another block anyway. The tower swayed precariously, then collapsed with a clatter. Rose giggled delightedly. Again, Helena smiled, one hand resting on her growing belly. The baby inside kicked vigorously, as if wanting to join the fun. "Breakfast is ready," she called, carrying plates to the table. Ethan scooped Rose up, swinging her onto his shoulders as he carried her to the kitchen. "Smells wonderful," he said, leaning to kiss Helena's cheek. "Mama, kiss too." Rose insisted, and Helena obliged, standing on tiptoes to reach her daughter's rosy face. After breakfast, as they were preparing for the small party they'd planned, a knock at the door announced Sarah's arrival, her arms laden with gifts. "Where's my favorite niece?" She called, and Rose ran to her, wrapping her arms around her aunt's legs. "Aunt Sarah, present?" Rose asked hopefully, eyeing the packages. Sarah laughed. "So direct. Yes, there are presents, but you have to wait for the party." As the day progressed, friends arrived: Maggie from the hotel, Dr. Miller and his wife, several deputies and their families, and many others who had become part of their extended circle. The house filled with laughter and conversation as Rose, dressed in a special outfit Sarah had made, presided over her celebration with the confidence of a much older child. Late in the afternoon, as the party was winding down, Helena found a quiet moment with Ethan on the porch. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "I keep thinking about that day we met. How could something so terrible lead to something so wonderful?" Ethan's expression grew serious. "I thank God every day that I was there, that I could help you, but what came after? That wasn't about me saving you, Helena. It was about you saving me." She looked at him questioningly. "Before you, I was just doing a job. Moving from town to town, upholding the law because it was right, but never really connecting with the people I protected." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You taught me that justice without compassion is empty. That a community is more than just a place where people live side by side, it's where they care for each other." Helena leaned against him, watching as Rose played with her new toys, surrounded by people who loved her. "We built this together," she said softly. "This home, this family, this life. And we're still building," Ethan replied, his hand moving to rest on her belly. Inside, Helena felt the baby kick again, strong and determined. "Yes," she agreed. "We're still building." As twilight settled over Redemption Creek, Helena looked out at the town that had once been the scene of her greatest humiliation, now transformed into the home of her greatest joy. From the boardwalk where she had lain bleeding to the house, filled with love and laughter, her journey had come full circle. The cowboy who had promised she would never be touched again had kept his word by touching her heart with a love that healed all wounds, by building a life where pain was transformed into purpose, and by creating a family that would continue their legacy of compassion and justice for generations to come. In the end, Redemption Creek had lived up to its name, offering them both the second chance they never knew they needed and the love they had always deserved.